In the heart of a bustling city, civil rights attorney Jordan Collins starts his day with a quiet breakfast, unaware his life is about to change. Moments later, a routine encounter with the police spirals into a shocking arrest that leaves his community stunned. But as tensions rise, this one act of injustice will ignite a chain of events that challenges the city's deepest divisions and leads to an unexpected fight for change. It was a warm summer morning, and the city was just beginning to stir. Jordan Collins, a highly respected civil rights attorney in his mid-30s, sipped his coffee at his favorite corner diner. With each sip, he took in the familiar hum of the neighborhood, the sounds of early morning traffic, pedestrians on their way to work, and the clinking of silverware from nearby tables. For Jordan, this was a peaceful ritual, a moment to clear his mind before a long day in court. His work fighting for justice was relentless, but it was mornings like this that grounded him. As he prepared to leave, his phone buzzed with a message from his mother, wishing him luck for the day. He smiled, replying briefly before sliding his phone back into his pocket. Stepping out of the diner and into the sunlight, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. Little did he know that this tranquility was about to be shattered. A short distance away, officers Miller and Harris patrolled the streets. Miller, a seasoned officer with a sharp, often hasty judgment, noticed Jordan walking toward his car. Without any clear reason, something about Jordan's presence seemed to trigger Miller's suspicions. Miller nudged his younger partner, Harris, and nodded toward Jordan. "Let's check this guy out," Miller muttered. Harris hesitated, glancing at Miller. "Think he's up to something?" Miller shrugged, a hint of a smirk on his face. "Maybe. Better safe than sorry." The two officers approached Jordan, their pace quickening. Jordan noticed them as he unlocked his car and gave a polite nod, but the officers' expressions were anything but friendly. Sensing their intent, he felt a pang of unease but maintained his composure. "Excuse me, sir," Miller began, his tone sharp. "Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Jordan raised an eyebrow, surprised but calm. "Just finished breakfast. I come here most mornings." Harris looked unsure, but Miller pressed on, his gaze hard. "Can you show us some ID?" Jordan obliged, reaching carefully into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. "Of course," he said, handing over his ID. "I'm Jordan Collins, an attorney. I work over at the—" Before he could finish, Miller cut him off, a look of skepticism crossing his face. "A lawyer, huh? And you're just hanging around here?" Jordan kept his tone steady. "Yes, I'm a civil rights attorney. If there's a problem, I'd like to know what it is." Miller's stance shifted, his hand resting on his holster. The situation escalated as bystanders began to gather, watching the tense exchange unfold. Harris shifted uncomfortably beside his partner, noticing the gathering crowd, but he followed Miller's lead, unsure of how to intervene. "I'm not seeing anything to justify this," Jordan said, looking Miller directly in the eye. "But I'm happy to comply if there's a valid reason." Miller's jaw tightened, unwilling to back down. In a decision born from bias rather than reason, he reached for his handcuffs, placing them on Jordan's wrists. "You're under arrest," he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. A murmur of shock rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Jordan's heart pounded, but he remained composed, though deeply disturbed by the unfolding injustice. He'd spent years fighting against exactly this kind of prejudice, but now he found himself on the other side, handcuffed, treated like a criminal with no cause. As the officers led him toward their patrol car, he caught the eye of an elderly woman who had watched the entire exchange. Her expression was one of sorrow and sympathy, a silent witness to the injustice Jordan was experiencing. Jordan held her gaze, feeling the weight of her unspoken support. Inside the patrol car, Jordan stared out the window, his mind racing. The reality of his arrest was setting in, but so was a sense of determination. This wasn't just about him. It was about a system that allowed this kind of abuse, and he was determined to fight it. This moment would not break him. It would ignite something much bigger. The police station was busy with its usual morning rush when officers Miller and Harris escorted Jordan Collins inside. Jordan kept his composure, but the gravity of his situation weighed heavily on him. He had spent countless hours in similar police stations, advocating for clients and holding officers accountable, but now he found himself on the other side of the law, facing an uncertain future. As the officers processed him, taking his fingerprints and mugshot, Jordan's thoughts drifted to his family and his clients. He knew how damaging even a wrongful arrest could be, especially for a public figure like himself. As a well-known civil rights attorney, his reputation was crucial. But more than his personal stakes, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that his arrest was symbolic of a much larger problem, one he'd fought against all his career. While he waited in the holding area, Lieutenant Emma Reed entered the station. Reed, recently promoted and known for her commitment to justice, had a reputation for questioning the methods of some of the veteran officers. She was known for her fairness and integrity, traits that had not always made her popular among her peers. She noticed Jordan in the holding area, his calm demeanor masking a storm of emotions. Reed's instincts told her that something was amiss. She approached Officer Walker, a young officer with a growing awareness of systemic issues within the department. Walker had seen Jordan's name on high-profile civil rights cases in the news, and the arrest had struck him as unusual. "Who's the guy in holding?" Reed asked, nodding in Jordan's direction. "That's Jordan Collins," Walker replied quietly. "The civil rights attorney." Reed's eyebrows shot up. "Collins? And why exactly is he in our holding cell?" Walker hesitated, glancing toward Miller and Harris, who were standing near the booking area, looking a bit too smug for his liking. Miller and Harris brought him in. Something about suspicious demeanor. Reed's eyes narrowed. Suspicious demeanor? For someone like him? She felt a familiar frustration building, a tension that she had encountered before in dealing with certain officers. Deciding not to jump to conclusions, she moved closer to Miller and Harris. "Can I have a word, gentlemen?" she asked, gesturing for them to join her in a side office. Once inside, she cut straight to the point. Why exactly was Collins brought in? Miller crossed his arms, his tone defensive. He was acting suspiciously. Didn't feel right. Had to be sure he wasn't up to something. Reed eyed him critically. "You're telling me that a respected civil rights attorney, someone whose work involves advocating for people in situations like this, was acting suspiciously? I want specifics, Miller." Miller shifted uncomfortably, but held his ground. "We were following our instincts." Reed felt her frustration grow, but she knew better than to argue in the moment. Instead, she took a breath, glancing at Walker as he entered the room. "Walker, were you there?" Walker looked uneasy but nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I saw the whole thing. Collins was cooperative, ma'am. Didn't seem to be doing anything wrong." Reed's suspicion solidified. "All right, that's enough for now." She dismissed the officers, her mind racing. Collins's presence in the station on such shaky grounds felt off, and her gut told her there was more to this story. If Miller and Harris had indeed acted on bias rather than evidence, she needed to address it swiftly. Walking back toward Jordan's holding cell, she paused, observing him through the bars. His calm demeanor struck her. He was a man who knew the law, who understood the weight of the system bearing down on him, and yet he maintained a dignity that was hard to ignore. Finally, she stepped forward, introducing herself. "Mr. Collins, I'm Lieutenant Reed. I just wanted to assure you that I'll be looking into this situation. I don't believe we've met, but I'm aware of your work." Jordan gave her a nod, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'd appreciate any fairness in handling this misunderstanding." She nodded firmly. "Fairness is exactly what you'll get." And with that, she left, her mind already working on how to address the fallout she sensed was coming. As Reed returned to her desk, she noticed murmurs spreading among the officers about Jordan's arrest. Outside, a growing crowd of bystanders, activists, and journalists had begun to gather, alerted by witnesses at the scene. News of his arrest had spread rapidly, bringing with it a surge of protesters demanding answers. Meanwhile, Chief Richard Foster arrived at the station, aware of the situation brewing both inside and outside. Foster, a cautious but principled leader, knew that handling this incident poorly could have disastrous repercussions. Reed approached him, laying out her concerns and suggesting they take a closer look into how the arrest was made. Foster listened, a somber look crossing his face as he absorbed the gravity of the issue. "If there's been a mistake, Reed," he said slowly, "we're going to need a plan to fix it, and fast." Reed nodded, fully aware of what was at stake. With tensions rising and the eyes of the community focused on their every move, the police station was bracing itself for a turning point none of them could afford to mishandle. Within hours of Jordan's arrest, the station's atmosphere grew tense. Outside, the crowd of protesters swelled, their chants echoing through the walls. Reporters arrived, cameras rolling, as community leaders took to social media, condemning the arrest. What had started as an isolated incident was quickly becoming a public reckoning. Lieutenant Reed sat in her office, reviewing the case file in detail. The more she read, the more her frustration grew. "Suspicious demeanor," she muttered under her breath. It was a vague excuse at best, and at worst, an insult to a system meant to protect and serve. As she continued her research, Reed came across Collins's background in detail. He wasn't just any civil rights attorney. He was one of the most prominent figures in the field. Collins had spent years challenging systemic injustices, advocating for marginalized communities, and exposing misconduct. The more she learned, the clearer it became. Jordan's work held significant weight in the city and beyond. Anxious about the mounting tension, Reed decided to speak with Chief Foster. She found him in his office, his face lined with concern as he looked out the window at the gathering crowd. "Chief, we've got a serious issue here," Reed said. "Jordan Collins is no ordinary suspect. He's a respected civil rights attorney, and his arrest on these grounds is raising serious questions. If this gets mishandled, it could lead to a breakdown in community trust." Foster sighed, turning to face her. "I know, Emma, but Miller and Harris swear they acted within their rights. If we walk back this arrest without solid proof, we risk backlash from inside as well." "Chief, we're already facing backlash," she countered. "The community's watching, and the longer we delay addressing this, the worse it'll get." Just then, an officer entered. "Chief, Lieutenant Reed, you should see this," he said, gesturing toward the break room, where a television was broadcasting a live news segment. The headline read, "Civil Rights Attorney Jordan Collins Arrested. Community Demands Justice." On the screen, footage showed the growing crowd outside the station, chanting for Collins's release and demanding accountability. Reed took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing. "Chief, we need to do more than just stand by. I suggest we involve someone impartial, a federal oversight team, or even a state investigator, to look into the arrest. That would show the public we're committed to transparency." Foster considered her words carefully. "It's a bold move, but it might be the only way to handle this head-on," he replied. "If there's a chance Miller and Harris overstepped, we need to know for sure." Meanwhile, Jordan remained in his holding cell, observing the growing commotion outside. He could hear the voices echoing through the station walls, each one a reminder of the cause he had fought for his entire career. Part of him wanted to use this moment to speak out, to confront the system that so often failed people like him. But he knew he had to tread carefully. The stakes were too high. Officer Walker, who had been quietly following the events, approached Reed after hearing of her plan. "Lieutenant, if I may, I think involving federal oversight is the right call," he said. "Jordan Collins is a man of influence. If this gets resolved fairly, it might open the door to meaningful dialogue." Reed nodded, grateful for Walker's insight. "Exactly, Walker. This isn't just about one arrest. It's about the message we're sending." With Foster's approval, Reed made the call. A federal oversight officer, Agent Jonathan Bennett, was briefed and quickly arrived at the station. He was a seasoned investigator, known for his impartial approach and commitment to justice. Agent Bennett met with Reed and Foster, then began his review of the incident. He spoke with witnesses, reviewed body cam footage, and scrutinized the officer's statements. With each passing hour, tension within the station grew as everyone awaited his findings. As the investigation unfolded, word spread among the protesters that an impartial review was underway. This news brought a temporary calm outside, though the crowd remained vigilant. Later that evening, Agent Bennett convened a meeting with Reed, Foster, and a few senior officers. His expression was serious, his findings thorough. "I've completed the preliminary investigation," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. While officers Miller and Harris may have been within the bounds of their authority, their actions were influenced by implicit bias. There was no substantial evidence to justify the arrest. I recommend immediate corrective measures and a public statement addressing the oversight. Foster looked tense but nodded. Thank you, Agent Bennett. We'll handle it from here. Once Agent Bennett left, Reed turned to Foster. Chief, we need to release Jordan immediately, and I believe we owe him an apology at the very least. Foster's gaze softened. You're right. Let's set it in motion. He instructed an officer to release Jordan, and Reed prepared to deliver the news to the public. Within moments, Jordan was brought to Reed's office. She looked at him, her eyes filled with genuine regret. Mr. Collins, I'm sorry for everything you've endured today. An oversight investigation has confirmed that your arrest was unwarranted. Jordan nodded, maintaining his calm demeanor but allowing a hint of relief to show. Thank you, Lieutenant Reed. This isn't over, but I appreciate your honesty and efforts. Outside, as Jordan stepped back into the daylight, the crowd erupted into cheers. Holding his head high, he addressed them briefly, expressing his gratitude for their support while urging calm and commitment to positive change. But in his heart, he knew this was just the beginning, a moment that would ignite something far greater than himself. The station buzzed with tension as news of Jordan's release swept through the precinct. Officers murmured among themselves, some relieved, others resentful. Jordan's release and the federal oversight's involvement stirred up powerful emotions, and for officers Miller and Harris, it felt like a public reprimand. Unwilling to let it slide, Miller sought out Lieutenant Reed, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Reed, meanwhile, was in her office, reviewing the steps the department would need to take to address this incident transparently. Lieutenant, with all due respect, you're throwing us under the bus, Miller said, his voice edged with anger. We were doing our jobs. He looked suspicious, and we acted on instinct. Reed met his gaze, unflinching. Miller, instinct is not a justification for an arrest without probable cause. Collins was simply going about his day, and you singled him out based on assumptions. Miller scoffed. So now it's wrong to follow our gut? With all the pressure on us, we're just supposed to ignore when something feels off? Reed's patience began to wear thin. What felt off was based on bias, Miller. It's no secret that implicit bias affects everyone, but it's our duty as officers to recognize it and not let it cloud our judgment. At that moment, Chief Foster entered the room, his presence instantly shifting the energy. I've heard enough, he said firmly. The oversight investigation has spoken. We have to acknowledge that we acted in error. Miller's face hardened. Chief, are we really going to throw ourselves at the mercy of every complaint from the community? This will only weaken us. Foster's eyes narrowed, his voice steady but stern. Miller, we serve this community. They are not our adversaries. They are the people we swore to protect. If we can't admit when we've wronged them, then we have no business wearing this badge. There was a silence as Miller absorbed the chief's words, but his expression remained defiant. Meanwhile, Harris, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. Chief, Lieutenant, maybe there is truth to what you're saying, but the last thing we want is to lose respect out there. Reed softened slightly. Respect is built on trust, Harris, and trust comes from accountability. If we're seen as unwilling to face our mistakes, then we're only adding fuel to the fire. The conversation was interrupted by a call over the station's loudspeaker. All officers to the briefing room. Urgent meeting called by Chief Foster. In the briefing room, officers gathered, the air thick with anticipation. Chief Foster took his place at the front, with Reed beside him. He waited until everyone settled, then began. I'll keep this brief, Foster said, scanning the room. As you know, we had an incident involving Mr. Jordan Collins, a respected civil rights attorney. His arrest was found to be unwarranted. Effective immediately, we'll be implementing additional training on de-escalation and bias recognition. A murmur spread through the room, and Foster raised his hand to quiet them. This isn't about punishment. It's about growth. Our commitment is to protect and serve every member of our community. And if we can't honor that commitment, then we're failing at our jobs. Lieutenant Reed stepped forward, sensing the importance of her role in setting the tone. "This training isn't an accusation," she added. "It's an opportunity to strengthen our skills and better serve our community. We're asking for your cooperation, not only because it's necessary, but because it's the right thing to do." The announcement had mixed reactions. Some officers nodded thoughtfully, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Miller, arms crossed, looked unimpressed but kept quiet. Once the meeting adjourned, Reed felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Officer Walker, his expression resolute. "Lieutenant, I just wanted to say, I support this. It's time we made some changes around here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help." Reed gave a small, appreciative nod. "Thank you, Walker. Your support means a lot. We need more officers like you, willing to look at the bigger picture." As Reed watched the officers disperse, her thoughts turned back to Jordan Collins. This incident had been a wake-up call, but she knew it was only the beginning. The community had taken a stand, and the department was feeling the impact, but for lasting change, much more would be required. Later that evening, as Reed reviewed the day's events in her office, Chief Foster joined her. He settled into the chair across from her, looking weary but determined. "Emma, today was rough, but it was necessary," he said. "If we're serious about making this right, we're going to need allies. Community leaders, people who trust us." Reed nodded, the same thought echoing in her mind. "Agreed, Chief. We've laid the groundwork, but without ongoing dialogue with the community, this won't mean much." Just then, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen. A news article had just gone live. The headline read, "Police Department Faces Reckoning in Wake of Civil Rights Attorney's Arrest." The words stung, but she knew they were deserved. Foster looked at the article over her shoulder, his face grim. "This is what we're up against," he said quietly, "but it's also what we have to overcome." Together, they sat in a shared moment of resolve, both fully aware that real reform wouldn't be achieved overnight. The journey ahead was bound to be arduous, but neither was willing to back down. In the end, they both knew, facing these truths was the only way forward. Outside the police station, a crowd had swelled, their voices rising in unison, calling for justice and accountability. Banners and signs waved in the air, bearing words like "Justice for Jordan," "End racial profiling," and "Accountability now." Community leaders, activists, and neighbors stood side by side, united by anger and a fierce determination to bring change. The gathering was peaceful, but the strength of their collective resolve was unmistakable. From his window, Jordan Collins watched the crowd with a mix of gratitude and unease. He hadn't expected this overwhelming show of support, and while it stirred something powerful within him, he was also wary of the potential backlash. The tension was palpable, and he knew all too well the risks that came with public scrutiny. At the station's entrance, Chief Richard Foster stepped out with Lieutenant Emma Reed by his side. Foster, visibly tense, adjusted the microphone set up by local media crews. The crowd hushed, eyes narrowing on him. They had come to hear answers, not platitudes. Taking a deep breath, Foster spoke. "Good evening, everyone. I want to address the incident involving Mr. Jordan Collins directly. I stand here acknowledging that mistakes were made. The officer's actions did not reflect the values of this department or the standards we strive to uphold." There were a few murmurs in the crowd, some relieved to hear his honesty, others unconvinced. Foster pressed on, though his voice wavered slightly. "I understand that words alone are not enough. As chief, I am committed to ensuring that appropriate actions are taken. We are initiating further training for all officers to address issues of bias, and I promise we will take this matter seriously." In the crowd, Jordan's mother, Mrs. Collins, listened with crossed arms. She was a pillar in the community and had seen far too many similar incidents. She raised her hand, and someone passed her a microphone. "Chief Foster," she began, her voice steady but charged. "Our community has heard promises like these before, yet we're still here, fighting for the same basic respect and rights. How can we trust that this time will be any different?" Foster hesitated, glancing at Reed. Reed, understanding the gravity of the question, stepped forward. "I understand your skepticism, Mrs. Collins," Reed said, meeting her gaze. "We can't undo what happened, but we're determined to make sure incidents like these become a thing of the past. This department is committed to being transparent, and we'll be collaborating with community members to ensure your voices are included in our reform process." A ripple of conversation spread through the crowd. Many were heartened by Reed's sincerity, while others exchanged skeptical glances. They had heard promises of reform before. Then, Jordan himself took a step forward. He had remained silent throughout the protest, observing quietly, but now he felt compelled to speak. He took the microphone from his mother, his gaze level as he addressed the officers and the crowd. "I appreciate the chief's words and the lieutenant's intentions, but let's be clear, this can't just be a one-time apology. What we need is a system that doesn't rely on moments like this to correct itself. We need proactive, lasting change. I'm not asking for anything radical. I'm asking for the respect and rights that should be afforded to everyone." The crowd erupted in applause, a unified wave of agreement that resonated around the station. Reed and Foster exchanged glances, both acutely aware of the importance of this moment. As the applause faded, Jordan continued, "I've spoken with some of you, and together we're starting the Community Justice Initiative. This will be an ongoing effort to address systemic issues within law enforcement and build bridges between our community and this department. But it's not something that just one side can accomplish." He turned to Reed. "Lieutenant, Chief Foster, will you work with us? Will you commit to something more than just words?" Reed felt the weight of his words and knew there was no easy answer. She looked to Foster, who gave a resolute nod, then stepped forward herself. "Yes, Jordan. I'll personally work with you in the Community Justice Initiative. We'll do this together, and we'll start by listening." A sense of cautious optimism rippled through the crowd. Jordan extended a hand, and Reed shook it firmly. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment, as cheers erupted again. It was a tentative bridge, built on the promise of mutual effort and understanding. As the crowd began to disperse, Chief Foster lingered, absorbing the weight of the commitment they'd made. He knew this wouldn't be easy and that it would likely face resistance both within the force and from skeptical community members. But standing there, watching his officers blend back into the crowd and speak to the people they served, he felt a glimmer of hope. Jordan watched his mother and neighbors leaving with determined expressions. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about his own experience anymore. It was about everyone who had felt powerless, everyone who had been marginalized or silenced. The journey ahead was daunting, but he was no stranger to uphill battles. As he turned to leave, Reed caught his eye. "Thank you, Jordan, for being here, for standing up, even if it shouldn't have come to this." Jordan nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant, for listening. That's the start." They parted ways, both carrying the weight of the responsibility ahead. The crowd might have gone home, but the mission was just beginning. The days following the rally outside the police station were filled with intense discussions, meetings, and late nights. Jordan Collins was relentless in building the framework for the Community Justice Initiative, CJI. His mission was clear. This initiative wasn't just about his wrongful arrest, but about dismantling the root causes of systemic issues in law enforcement. He was determined to create a sustainable platform that would ensure justice, transparency, and respect for every member of the community. The first formal meeting between the CJI and the police department took place in a modest community center hall. Around a large table sat Jordan, Lieutenant Emma Reed, Officer Walker, a handful of community leaders, and a few other representatives from the police department. The atmosphere was tense, but charged with a collective purpose. Everyone in the room understood that this was more than just a meeting. It was the beginning of something potentially transformative. Jordan opened with a straightforward statement. "This initiative is here to hold the police accountable, but it's also here to work with the department to create a culture of mutual respect and understanding. We're looking to bridge divides, not widen them. I hope everyone here can share that vision." Lieutenant Reed nodded, recognizing the weight of Jordan's words. She had been struggling within the department, especially with officers resistant to reform, but she was resolved to stay committed. "We're ready to take real steps toward change," she said, her voice steady. "We've seen what happens when we ignore these issues. It's time to confront them, honestly and head-on." The first topic on the agenda was de-escalation training. Jordan, alongside community leaders, proposed that all officers undergo comprehensive training, with an emphasis on nonviolent conflict resolution and cultural sensitivity. Officer Walker, who had recently experienced the harsh reality of biases firsthand, voiced his support. "Too often, we react before we even assess the full situation," Walker said. "We're taught to assert control, but that approach doesn't build trust. If we want to genuinely serve our community, we need to learn to understand it." The police representatives listened, some reluctantly, others more open. Walker's willingness to confront his peers was a turning point in itself. His voice encouraged a few others to speak up in agreement. The more resistant officers exchanged wary glances, but Reed's presence made it clear that this wasn't just a passing initiative. There would be follow-through, and accountability was no longer optional. The meeting progressed to discuss the establishment of a legal aid clinic, a central piece of Jordan's vision. The clinic would offer resources for those facing discrimination or wrongful accusations, providing a safety net for community members who often found themselves voiceless against authority. Jordan spoke passionately about its importance. "The legal aid clinic will offer our people a chance to fight unjust treatment without fear," he explained. "We're not here to create chaos or undermine authority. We're here to make sure everyone, police and citizens, plays by the same rules." The officers present listened, some visibly uncomfortable with the idea of a clinic dedicated to holding law enforcement accountable. But Reed understood its necessity and supported it without hesitation. "We can't act as if we're beyond scrutiny," she asserted. "A legal aid clinic isn't an enemy, it's a partner in accountability." Outside the center, as the meeting wrapped up, a handful of reporters and community members gathered, eager to hear about the progress made. Jordan and Reed stood side by side as they answered questions, emphasizing the collaborative spirit of the initiative. Reed knew they'd need to show tangible results soon to keep the community's trust, and she was determined to act quickly. After the meeting, Jordan lingered, taking in the feeling of hope stirring in the air. He had seen similar movements falter before, overtaken by bureaucracy or infighting. But with Reed and Walker's support, he dared to believe that they might actually be building something that would last. Over the following weeks, the CJI held workshops, bringing community members and police officers together to discuss experiences and perspectives. It was a delicate process. Misunderstandings arose, but Jordan remained calm and patient, guiding the conversations with a steady hand. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Reed pulled Jordan aside. "I know this isn't easy, but thank you," she said. "We're making progress, even if it feels slow." Jordan nodded. "Change is slow, Emma, but I can feel it. People are starting to listen, to understand. That's where it begins." For Officer Walker, these sessions were a revelation. Hearing directly from community members opened his eyes to the lived experiences he hadn't fully understood before. As he listened to people's stories, some of pain, others of mistrust, he felt a deep responsibility to use his position as an advocate for justice from within. The impact of the initiative spread beyond the walls of the station. Local residents began sharing positive interactions with police officers, and the department's image slowly began to shift. But for Jordan, Reed, and Walker, this was only the beginning. One night, as Jordan walked home from another CJI meeting, he glanced at the city lights and felt a sense of renewed purpose. For the first time in a long while, he believed they were not just reacting to injustice, but building the foundation for a just future. The next few months marked a shift in the city. The Community Justice Initiative, CJI, began to flourish, and its presence brought a new spirit of cooperation and accountability. Under Jordan Collins' leadership, the initiative launched several key programs aimed at fostering understanding between law enforcement and the community they served. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but the seeds of change were taking root. One of the most successful programs was the de-escalation and cultural sensitivity training for officers, which Lieutenant Reed made mandatory across the department. Many officers, initially resistant, gradually began to embrace the sessions. Reed and Jordan collaborated to design each training, ensuring they included real-life scenarios and meaningful conversations. Officers were encouraged to share their own experiences and to listen to the perspectives of community members who had often felt marginalized or mistreated. Officer Walker took a lead role in the training, sharing his own journey from skepticism to self-awareness. Standing in front of his fellow officers, he spoke with conviction. "I used to think that policing was all about control, about being the one in charge. But this community is part of us. We can't protect it if we're not truly listening to it." As the sessions progressed, even officers like Miller, who had been critical of Jordan from the beginning, began to show signs of change. He attended every session, and while he still held some reservations, the exposure to community voices was slowly chipping away at his hardened view. Meanwhile, the CJI's legal aid clinic opened its doors. Located in the heart of the city, the clinic quickly became a beacon of hope for residents facing discrimination or legal issues. Lawyers, including Jordan, volunteered their time, providing resources for individuals who previously had no access to justice. The clinic also held workshops on legal rights, teaching people about their protections under the law. The community's gratitude was evident, and Jordan often found himself humbled by the impact of this work. One afternoon, as Jordan wrapped up a workshop, a young man named Marcus approached him. "I never thought someone like you would care about people like us," he admitted. "I always felt invisible, like no one cared if I got a fair shot." Jordan looked at Marcus with compassion. "Everyone deserves justice, Marcus. And I'm not just here for myself. I'm here for all of us. We're changing this city together." Inspired by the clinic's success, Lieutenant Reed sought out Jordan to discuss bringing the police department's support even closer. She proposed that officers rotate through the clinic on volunteer shifts to witness firsthand the impact of legal struggles on community members. Jordan hesitated but ultimately agreed, seeing it as a powerful step toward empathy. The first officer to volunteer was Officer Walker. As he spent time at the clinic, he began to grasp the emotional toll of navigating a legal system that had historically overlooked marginalized voices. In a moment of self-reflection, he realized that, for too long, he'd underestimated the power of compassion in his own role. With each passing week, community police dialogues grew more open. Conversations that once ended in defensiveness now unfolded with understanding. Some citizens remained skeptical, still recalling past grievances, but others cautiously opened up, hoping that this time, change was real. Then, in a groundbreaking development, Jordan was invited to speak at the police academy. Chief Foster, determined to reshape the future of policing in the city, wanted Jordan to address new recruits about the power of fairness, integrity, and the importance of building trust. Jordan's speech marked a milestone for both the CJI and the department. As he stood before the young faces of the future force, he felt a surge of responsibility. "When you wear this badge," he told them, "remember that it's not just a symbol of authority, it's a symbol of service. Every time you choose empathy, every time you choose understanding, you're strengthening this city. Change doesn't happen in big steps, it happens in these small, daily choices." The impact of his words lingered in the air, resonating with recruits who saw themselves not just as enforcers of law but as advocates for justice. Soon, the city began to see tangible improvements in police-community relations. Crime rates gradually declined, partly due to an increase in trust between the police and the residents. Complaints of police misconduct dropped as officers, guided by the training and the influence of leaders like Reed and Walker, committed to ethical standards. But the change didn't stop there. Inspired by Jordan's work, local organizations and businesses began supporting the CJI's mission. The clinic received additional funding to expand its resources, and community centers offered their spaces for workshops, forums, and events. One evening, Reed, Walker, and Jordan gathered at a community celebration to mark 6 months of the initiative's impact. Amid the laughter and music, Reed raised a toast, her face glowing with pride. "To everyone who believed in the possibility of something better. Tonight, we celebrate what we've accomplished, but tomorrow, we continue the work." Jordan raised his glass, humbled and grateful. To the journey, and to everyone who dared to hope. As the night went on, a sense of unity and purpose filled the room. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The initiative had laid down roots, and the promise of change seemed more real than ever. But as Jordan looked out over the gathering, he knew there were still challenges ahead. Change, he reminded himself, was a constant journey, not a final destination. Months passed, and the once divided city began to show signs of transformation. The Community Justice Initiative, CJI, and the police department's new training programs were fostering an atmosphere of mutual respect. Relationships between officers and residents had taken on a new tone, one rooted in trust and shared understanding. For Jordan, Lieutenant Reed, and Chief Foster, the journey felt far from over, but they finally saw a glimmer of the change they had fought so hard to create. One afternoon, Jordan found himself back at the legal aid clinic. It was bustling with volunteers, young attorneys, and students eager to learn and contribute. The waiting area was filled with community members seeking guidance. As he looked around, Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This place, once just a dream, had become a pillar of hope for those who'd once felt helpless. During a quiet moment, a former client, Teresa, approached Jordan. She'd attended a CJI rights workshop months ago, seeking legal guidance to secure stable housing for her children. Today, her demeanor was different, confident, hopeful. She expressed gratitude to Jordan and shared that she now volunteered part-time, helping others navigate the legal system. "It's because of people like you, Mr. Collins, that I can stand here today," Teresa said, her voice filled with conviction. "I always thought the system was too big, too powerful, but seeing what you've built, it gives me hope." Jordan nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "It's people like you who keep us going, Teresa. Change is a team effort. We're just getting started." As word of the CJI's success spread, other cities took notice. Representatives from nearby police departments and community organizations reached out to Jordan and Reed, eager to learn from their experience. Reed, in particular, found herself speaking at regional conferences, advocating for the integration of de-escalation and cultural sensitivity training into law enforcement protocols. She knew it was only a small step in a long journey, but she felt a new sense of determination and purpose. At the police station, officers like Walker had become outspoken advocates for reform. Even those who had once resisted the new practices were beginning to acknowledge the positive impact. Miller, who had been one of the most vocal skeptics, now found himself questioning his own biases and assumptions. He wasn't fully changed, but he'd taken the first steps in a journey of self-reflection that he once thought unnecessary. In one of their monthly meetings, Reed and Chief Foster reviewed the department's progress. Complaint reports had dropped noticeably, and Reed pointed out the improved relationship between officers and the community. Foster leaned back, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "This is only the beginning, Emma. We can't lose momentum. The work's not done." Reed agreed, her voice resolute. "If we keep going, maybe this department can become a model for others. A department that's accountable, responsible, and genuinely respected by the community." Meanwhile, the CJI continued expanding. With additional grants and donations from local businesses, they launched new programs, youth mentorships, job training, and mental health resources. Jordan's vision of empowering marginalized communities was taking shape in ways he hadn't fully imagined. He even started considering a possible future in advocacy work full-time, knowing that his skills could create even larger waves of change. One weekend, the CJI hosted an open forum where officers, community members, and activists gathered for a candid discussion. The air was thick with emotion as individuals shared stories of both trauma and healing, of pain and resilience. One by one, people took to the microphone, speaking of encounters, some that went wrong, others that had changed their perception of law enforcement for the better. Jordan was invited to speak, and as he stood before the crowd, he saw familiar faces, people he'd represented, officers he'd clashed with, and community members who had once felt disenfranchised. Clearing his throat, he addressed the room. "We didn't get here overnight, and we have so much more to do. But standing here today, seeing all of you, I know that together, we are unstoppable." His words resonated, met by a chorus of applause and nods of agreement. As the event drew to a close, Lieutenant Reed approached Jordan, her expression a mixture of pride and gratitude. "We've been through a lot to get here, haven't we?" Jordan nodded, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "More than I ever imagined, but it was worth every step." The evening ended with a sense of shared commitment. People lingered, speaking in small groups, exchanging ideas and phone numbers, eager to build upon what had been started. In that moment, the city felt like a united force, bound by a commitment to justice and progress. In the weeks that followed, Chief Foster announced further reforms within the police department, including a program where officers would partner with community mentors. It was a bold move, one met with mixed reactions, but for the first time, even the skeptics could see the value in building a bridge, rather than a barrier, between the force and the people they served. For Jordan, the journey had been transformative, changing not just the community but himself. The city's progress was proof that, even in the face of adversity, change was possible. And as he watched the seeds of hope grow into tangible progress, he felt confident that this was only the beginning of a larger, enduring legacy.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.